Hi, this is Blocking Bag. Welcome to another episode of the Swing of Smart Contacts in Living Place. Today, let's be talking about aborting the education. Now, before we continue, let's head over to the PS code um, let's look at this code. Now, we have our counter objects, our stocks, and here we're creating a new counter object, and here we're incrementing it. So now, let's say in this scenario, you know that this object is a shared object, so it means that anybody can increment. Anybody can mistake it, anybody can delete the object. So now, let's say we wanted only the admin or the person that created the objects to be the only person that were able to increment the objects. What should you do? Now, let's go about it this way. Let's allow it to our struct here and let me call it address. Going to be of type address. And now we're going to pass in the admin as the person that's created struct. Going to be ctx dot send. So now, how do we implement that and only make sure that it's only the creator of the counter that will be able to implement it? So now, I know that the first thing you think of is using an if statement. Now, let's try that and see. Well, that's not actually the best way, but let's try that and see. Then we'll try the other method, which is abort. So let's use let's try if statement. So I can now say if counter dot admin is equal to. So now, let me take in my trash upon text now because I need it to, let me take in, an immutable reference of it. So, as now I cannot get the sender interaction. I cannot see if the admin of the counter is the same as the sender interaction, which is going to be ctx dot sender. Which then do I want to implement the counter? Let me come and move the scope up here and let me put in my semicolon. It's like this. Now, if I publish this my contact, definitely you will notice that it's only the person that's um that created the counter that we're able to call it because of the if statement. But this is not the best way to go around it. But first of all, before I show you the other way, let me the right way, let me deploy the smart contact and let me show you using. So let me click on publish. So successfully created publish our smart contacts. Now let me create a counter. So we've created a new counter. Let me copy the object ID of the counter back to Sui scan. I'm on that already. So let me put my object ID here. Now if you look at it now, our counter value is 10, which is the initial value we give to it. Now let me increment the counter. So if I increment the counter as I'm expected, definitely it will increment by 1 because since we're the one that published this smart contract and we're the one that's created a new counter, definitely our address, if I come here now, see the admin address is the same thing as our address here. So definitely it will work out. So let me execute this code. That's successfully. Let me refresh this. We see now the value has incremented by 1. Now let me come back here and change my wallet address. Let me try to use another wallet to implement the counter. Let me use this first wallet here. So let me call the function increment counter. And right now, if I try to increment this counter, because of this if statement I put in here, definitely the counter will not increment. So let me execute this. The code is going to go successfully, fine and good, but the counter is not going to be incremented. So now look at it, it was successful. I try to refresh as expected. um to not implement. But I don't know if you notice something wrong here. How do we try to tell the caller of the function that the actual field? Because if you look at it right now, we really have a field interaction or a successful interaction. And right now, this like looks like a failed interaction, but it's actually successful because since it was not able to increment the counter, there was no use. It's now totally a failed interaction. But right now, it's like a successful interaction. So there has to be a way to tell the user that this thing you're trying to do is impossible. It's going to be a failed interaction. So how do we do that? So right now, we cannot use if I statement because we don't have try and catch an error on move. So we can only use abort. So they should be making sense to tell the user that this transaction was failed. It was impossible. We never able to implement the counter and fill everything. So the way of doing it is not to use if statements, is to use the abort statement. So now let me come over here. Let me remove this code out of the block. And now let me use the abort keyword. Now this abort keyword will fill the transaction and tell the user that since now let me come here and use not. So now here if you look at it, it says if the admin of the counter is not equal to the sender of the transaction, abort. And now if you're aborting, we have to abort that error code. So just in case we have lots of abortions on our cloud contacts, we know we actually give an abortion like each abort an error code to know where the error is coming from when debugging. So right now, if the compiler like tries to go through this code, it will check if the sender of the transaction, the caller of the transaction or the caller of the function is not the same thing as the person that created the counter. It's now abort. And one thing about aborting is that when you're aborting, any other changes you have made before in that function, it will revert all the changes. So now let's say I was going to increment the counter before and after. So now let me come here. Um let me copy this line of code and let me put it over here. Let's say I was not using the abort before. Let me show you something. Now let's say I was leaving it like this before and I was actually let me bring this back up here. That was the abort keyword, the same way we did before. Now if I do something like this now, let me publish this code again and show you something. Let me go back to the shell index. I think this was it. Let me switch this address back again. Now, right now we're supposed to increment the counter two types. So we increment the first time, increment the second type. So now let me deploy our package, depublish our package. Successfully. Now let's create counter. We call this function create counter. So if we create a new counter, let me come here and copy the counter object ID and go back to scan and paste it over here. Accordingly, increment counter function. Now let's do it. So now if you look at it, our value is sit down just like before. When if I call the increment function, you're going to increment it two times. Incrementing the first time, then checking if the sender if the color of the function inside this if the color of the function is the same as the admin of the counter, then it will increment it the second time. Now let me change this, copy my object ID again. Let me execute this code. Now, like successful. Let me come back here. Now it's incremented by 2. Now let me switch my wallet address again and to do that. Let me use this first wallet address and let me try to increment the counter again. Let me come back here and click on increment counter. Let me put my counter ID. Now, before I run this code, first of all, it will increment the counter by 1. Then after incrementing my counter by 1, try to check if the color of the function is the same as the admin of the function, which in this case it is not. Because if you look at it now, the admin has this wallet address, and now right now we also call the function this wallet address. So definitely it only increments the counter by one. So if I do this, I execute this code now, and if I come here and refresh, we would see that we only incremented the counter by one. But whereas if we were to use abort now let me make use of the abort now. Let me come down here and now let me change this to if the admin is not equal to the color of the function, then abort the code now. Once I use abort here now, in the former case, it incremented it by one, and before it checks, when it was not, it did not increment it. Right now, with this abort code, once the compiler checks that this admin is not the same as the color of the function, it will go. This incrementing in mid here would not work. It will go and revert um that's that's changed. So what abort does is that once there's an abortion in a function, it goes back to revert all the changes made. Now let's try to test out what I was talking about. Let's redeploy package again. Let me switch back to this address, and let me republish the package. So if I'll publish the package, let me create a new counter. We successfully created a new counter. Let me copy the counter ID. Now, let's try to go and use a lot address to increment the counter, and let's see what will happen. Let me change this back to this first one. If you remember before, when we tried to do that to the former code, it's incremented by one, and when you check that it was not the user, it did not increment. But this time with this abortion, even though it's incremented by one, once it checks that it is not the user, like it is not the same, it's not the admin of the counter, it will revert the change. Now, let me come here again and call this increment. When back in, I will look at it. Let me paste the object ID here also. I'm able to keep track. So if I come back to fields, we have 10 here. Now, if you look at it now, the admin address here is 09x85, and here now we're using a different address to call the increment function. And let's what has happened now. I try to execute it. Look at it, the code abort with command 0. I see. So now it's aborted. Why? Because the color of the function is not the same address to the admin. Now, if you look at it now, we first made an increment before aborting. Let's go and check if that increment was made. So if I refresh, you know that it will still be 10. Now, look at it, it's still 10. Whereas when we use a statement, sorry, when we use each statement before, like when we just use each statement, that's no abortion, it's just incremented the first time. And when you see that it was not the user, it continued. But with abortion, with when using aborting, it will go back and revert all the changes made in that function. So that way you're able to save gas fees and the rest of it. So apart from abort, another way we can abort a code or use to check in smart contracts is we can use assert. You must have seen assert. So apart from abort, we have assert. One thing about abort is that you look at it now, we're using abort, we're using an if statement. So if we want to do the same thing without using an if statement, we can now use assert. So to use assert, we have to come here and say assert, and assert is a micro function. So I come here, put assert, then we'll now put our condition. So we want to make sure that for this our counter to increase, we want to make sure that the counter dot admin is always the same with the sender interaction. So we want to always make sure that before this code below is being run, that the admin is always the same as the sender. Then if it is not the same, we'll put a comma, then there'll be an abortion code. So let me make this abortion code, let me make it 2 this time. If you look at it before, the abortion code was 0, this time let me make it 2. Now, after doing this now, we no longer need to use abort. So it's either you use abort or use assert. So most of the times in code, you see most programmers, most times you see yourself using assert because it's way easier to implement and more easier to read than using abort. So very few times you mostly have to use abort. So right now, I'll just comment out the abort and the if and else statement because with assert, you know that to use if. Um, assert will take care of things. And mind you, look, take note of something assert. We are putting the condition in which the next line of code below and all be run. So we are checking that the admin of the counter is always the same as the sender. So that's the condition that means that it should pass this line of code and run. If not, if it does not meet that criteria, it will abort and to give you an error code of 2. Now, let me try to publish this smart contract. Let me change my let's try this again. And let me try to republish this smart contract. Which successfully published. Let me create a new counter. Let me copy the counter objects ID. Now let me try to run increment the counter with the same address I used to create it. So let me come here, click on increment counter. So let me come back here and this. Now if you look at this, come over to fields, you look at it that the value is 10. Let me come here and execute it to increment the value. So it's successful. Let me refresh. Now we have to. Now let me change the address. Let me use another address. Let me use this now to also increment the counter. To switch address. Let me try to increment the counter again. Now this would not work. Go to stop and to abort. If you look at it now, it aborted this error code 2. Just like where I put the code here 2. Now it said that it's aborted with an error code of 2 because the um the admin did not fit the with the sender with transaction. So that's it for aborting. So you can head over to the move book, read more about aborting, play with it. So there are cases where you need abort like a lot of use cases. Sometimes like when you want to check for admins of some stocks, when you want to check the owner of objects, there are lots of cases you need to abort and start abort some codes because you don't use an if and else statement. You will always want to tell the user that the transaction failed when it's used and also refer to every changes. So that's it for aborting. If you have any questions or any concerns, if you're confused, you can actually drop your questions on the comment section. I'll always be able to answer or feel free to DM me. I'll drop my Telegram and X handle in the description video. Thank you very much. See you on the next tutorial video.